Hi everyone. Today I have Harry with me here on my channel, and Harry's going to share something with you all that I don't have a lot of knowledge about. I know a little bit here and there, but I think we're going to go into the nitty-gritty about the history of how our dietary guidelines has come up starting in the 1930s in America and moving forward, what sort of research has been done in the past and why we're actually pushing the different diets that we are pushing, etc. So over to you, Harry, and thank you so much for being here.
I said to you a while ago that I was interested in, getting together and just doing a bit of a chat on some sort of topic that that you were interested in, but hadn't much of a background in. I've done a few things with. What was that?
This is the one.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Sorry.
I've done a few. Yes, yeah, correct. I've done a few with Bart. I'm thinking about Bart, and but they were more focused on the Mediterranean diet and those sort of things, and sort of demystifying, discussing a bit about my background, and if people wanted more information about that, the myths and my background, they can check those earlier videos. Today, we're just sort of trying to focus more on, how we got to the sort of, the sort of dietary guidelines and the science behind it, and sort of the key players and the politics, because a lot of people, they've may have seen the sort of the nutritional debates that happened, sort of the great USDA debate, it was, as it was called, and there you had basically the key proponents of the plant-based world and the key proponents of the animal-based sort of dietary world, like John McDougall, Robert Atkins, Barry Shears, and a whole lot of other sort of players like Ornish. There was a couple of others as well, which sort of have died by the wayside and have been forgotten. But funny, there was also a small presentation done by Eric Westman, and everybody knows him in the low carb community out of Duke University and his research. But that's most people's memories, and those are the key players, the sort of the plant-based doctors, and the sort of the Atkins or people that are supporting a similar, like the Zone, the Atkins diet, the sort of the animal-based sort of protein type diets. I mean, you have also people back then, wasn't in the debate, but Michael Eads, who basically wrote the Protein Power book. And he's well known within the low carb community, and I've used some of his information in the past, so he's really knowledgeable about historical stuff going right back to Egypt and onwards. So he's a great resource for anyone in our community. But a lot of people don't really know some of the players, how some of these strands came about. I mean, even the vegan movement, I mean, has its origins from the sort of the hippie, the vegetarian movement. It's sort of an offshoot of that. But really the plant-based movement has also got roots very early in academia as well. And a lot of people don't realize that its origins aren't even American. They're actually basically German. So I mean, we know, yeah, and we know a lot, because remember there was a strong vegetarian movement in Germany in the 1920s and 30s. I mean, even Adolf Hitler was actually a vegetarian. Most people,
I know that much.
exactly. Most people are aware of that, but there was a very strong movement in Germany. So you had basically elements both of the left and right that were, very strong in this movement. It had different dimensions and all that, but it was, quite popular. Weston A. Price, also back in the 1930s, was also basically a vegetarian before he went around and did his little trips around investigating different populations and realizing that what he believed was absolutely bollocks, because he found all these populations that were consuming a lot of animal rich foods and were very healthy and very robust, and over multiple generations were in great health. But I mean, with all this sort of information, if we look at the early parts of the 50s and 60s, if you went to a doctor and you were overweight, they'd recommend a low carb diet.
Yeah.
That was the standard back then. Most people don't realize that. That was the standard diet. Up until the late, the early 60s, the American Heart Association was still, fine with animal products and promoting them. Had no problems whatsoever.
So how do you think that they managed to hide that? Because I mean, I know the history and with Ansel Keys and all of that, but
that's one of the players.
But since we used to give that advice, somehow they managed to sweep that under the carpet so that people are not even aware of that. Are you going to dive into that? How they managed to do that?
Yeah,
okay.
I'm going to. We have to go back to a fellow who was a refugee from Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
He basically, Walter Kempner was his name, and he basically came out of Duke University. Got a job at Duke University, and he started doing a whole lot of experiments on rodents to try different combinations. This is pre-Randall cycle. People need to realize. So this is because Philip Randall was in the 1963 where he elucidated sort of the Randall cycle about how when you increase mixed macronutrients, you basically induce at the cell level a certain level of resistance in taking any more nutrients in, and that basically means that you drive this sort of insulin resistance, or if you do it chronically, metabolic syndrome that we basically know today. But back in the 1930s, they had no idea about this. Yes, they had some ideas in Germany in terms of there was a strong movement there in terms of hormones and how hormones affect sort of questions of lipolysis. They were looking at people who had sort of diabetes 1 and how they used to waste away and stuff like that. So they were looking at all the hormonal systems, but they were also looking at basically what nutrients are doing to people in different ways. And so they were playing around with all these nutrients. But there was a lot of work being done to see what combinations or what results will come out of that. But eventually, people like Kempner and others sort of ended up as refugees in America. He was one of the few that actually nutritionists coming out of Germany that basically ended up in academia. Quite lucky, had a few friends which helped him, which sort of helps along. Contacts are everything, as you know, in academia. Yep. And but after getting his post, he started doing a lot of experiments, and those experiments basically started. He started looking at what happens. Because a lot of people knew, if you go low carb, or you basically have fat loss, or you have certain results, a certain disease profile changes. So what happens if you go the other way? And that's what he did. He basically invented the rice diet, and he basically really went like 94% carbohydrates.
Whoa.
Yes, 4%. 4%. This is what you have to do in order to make it work. 4%, protein. And so you force the body to spare protein as a consequence. And and 2% fat. So the body becomes very catabolic under those circumstances. Does it remind you of any specific diet that certain people are following?
Let me think. Could it be the vegan diet?
So now you understand where some of these people. I mean, the closest proponent to that style of diet is John McDougall. He's the starch man, promoting starch and all that, because very much, Walter basically, that's what he believed. He said he wasn't really into vegetables and stuff like that. He sort of lowered the electrolytes, because obviously when you're consuming so much carbohydrate, you've got, you end up with water retention, you end up with a lot of retention of these electrolytes. So he basically lowered sodium, all the sort of the key electrolytes to really low levels in as far as intake. And basically he just basically supplemented with iron and all the other vitamins, because obviously, we know that a refined carbohydrate diet is basically is very poor in, vitamins and minerals. It's
Sorry,
just
was there a restriction on the caloric content in this
it was
study or not?
about 2,000 kilocalories that were basically being used at the time.
Yeah.
So now let me try to remember. Rice. Rice was about up to, I can't remember the low, there was a low end, but up to 350 grams of rice, as much fruit juice, up to a litre of fruit juice, and as much fruit as you like. And
Holy crap.
even on top of that, you could actually consume raw sugar.
Wow.
I mean, he actually encouraged his people, because initially they were in a clinical sort of setting within a hospital. So for a period of time, and for several weeks, and he was very strict. He was basically, if people didn't comply, he used to whip them. He had a
I like
few.
that.
He had a few. Exactly. He had a few weird sort of. I don't know whether it's the German side of him or whether it's just the vegans, or that sort of look, I don't know whether academia was like that back then in the 1930s. Maybe they were a bit more strict. But I remember as a youngster having to put my hand out and getting caned, which doesn't happen nowadays. So it's a very different experience.
Yeah. But that diet is literally is very close to half a kilo of carbohydrates each day, and they were locked up in a hospital. You say, so they didn't really
for several,
exercise or anything?
Well, the funny thing is that he actually he'd already done some rat studies, doing these sort of extreme macros, and saw the result, them losing weight. And we know what it is now. It's the Randall cycle.
Yeah.
Back then they had no idea. And the thing is, this is where the concept of that glucose is essential. So we need to understand where it's actually come from. It doesn't come from somebody just invented it. There's actual research that was done that actually affected people's thinking, saying, hold on, I mean, we know that that's bollocks nowadays, because if you basically drink a whole lot of alcohol, the body will prioritize alcohol before glucose, because it's a bigger toxin than glucose. So we understand that now, and we understand the effects of on the body. But he was getting really good results in terms of weight loss. I mean, really good results in terms of weight loss. Many people don't realize, because a lot of people, they think Pritikin diet, they think the Ornish diet, they think Esselstyn, they think all these people, but really these people basically were influenced by this guy. By Walter. Walter was the guy that actually had done the research that influenced these people and convinced them that this was the way to go. So it's not actually, but at the same time, Walter wasn't actually a plant-based supporter. This is another thing that people, after a couple of months, he started introducing some lean meats and other things, and vegetables and lean meats. Right. So it wasn't pure like carbohydrate, because he realized how catabolic it was. He realized basically that it was nutrient deficient. He had that understanding, but he was one of those, like a pure experimentalist. It was basically trying to see what happens when you force the body into these very extreme states.
That's how you find things out. That's how you conduct research.
Exactly.
But we don't really necessarily want to do it on humans.
We don't want to live that way, obviously. No. And he understood that yes. You can rapidly lose a lot of weight, but basically it's not a good idea as a long-term thing to basically do. It's a dangerous thing. That's why he wasn't a plant-based supporter, but it's the plant-based people that latched onto this sort of science, and then basically created their own sort of diets around it.
We're doing that today as well with all sorts of things. We just take the tidbits that we like, and we don't see the consequences, and then we create disaster.
Exactly. There's a lot of cherry picking that happens, especially within the, sort of the dietary sort of gurus that are around, because it's convenient. It's even the same thing. Even in our community, sometimes there are certain people that basically don't realise that there are sort of nuanced things. Fat requirements for women that have got bigger fat stores are very different than the fat requirements that are for men. And protein requirements for men. I mean, women can go out there and they can actually bodybuild as much as they like. They're never going to get the big hypertrophy, the big muscle building that men can do.
No.
It's just not going to happen, because our physiology is completely different. And so women have got more fat stores and they need that. And you can even see it in our closest relatives. When I did that chimp thing chat with Bart, and I actually showed that basically male chimps had bugger all in terms of, in terms of fat storage.
Yeah.
But and that is basically a common heritage in terms of fat storage and deposition and all that. So there are good reasons why there are those sort of differences that people sort of sometimes neglect or.
So diving off topic slightly, where just
Mm-hmm.
because you mentioned that with the fat stores, that the male chimps don't have much fat stores, and it's the same thing in humans. Would there be a case for women craving carbohydrates more than men because of that?
Yes, and the extra fat is actually what blunts that. Where for men it seems like protein seems to have a bit of a higher blunting point to some extent. I mean, you can't just go really, just protein, but it does seem to have a bit of that in that regard.
That's interesting, because there are a couple of carnivore-ish keto people out there promoting a lot of protein, and some people don't want to believe them because they might be selling some protein powders, etc. But they're all men, at least as far as I know.
Look, and that's the thing that that we sort of get in our community. It's very much, it's nuanced. I like yourself. I mean, I try to basically say to women, well, you can't do the same sort of the diet exactly the same way that men are doing it.
No.
And
I'm glad you're saying that.
Yeah, and the thing is, but there is that strong sort of element there, that tribal type element that basically tries to push that. I'm going, no, you've got more hormonal shifts and changes and requirements for more fat to balance those hormones and to regulate those hormones much better and more than men. So, your physiology is designed to basically store more fat, basically for reproduction and for other things. And so that is some of the drivers behind it. And if you go against that physiology, you start struggling. You can see, like in the low carb community or keto community, when women try to emulate sort of the dietary practices of men, then women, then their own, they start suffering. Their health starts suffering. They don't get the same results. Their hormones end up in a mess. And it's the same thing like with fasting. I think fasting, men do much better on prolonged fast than women for very similar reasons. And that's why I always, for women, I say, well, I recommend sort of time restricted feeding, which is a normal thing, which, if you're in a tribal society, you'd go out to hunt or gather. And by the time you actually got any food, it would be close to midday, and then bring it back. And then you'd consume that before the sun went down.
Yeah.
And it's in daylight, within that sort of circadian sort of, sort of frame that a lot of us nowadays don't follow. I try to stick to even with my diet, between 11ish to 6.
Yeah. I feel absolutely best when I'm eating once or maybe twice a day sometimes, but as long as it's kind of, we're talking lunchtime and
Mm.
early dinner.
Yep,
When I eat in the
exactly.
evenings, I
Yeah.
I think my sleep is suffering, but I don't have enough data to support that yet. But I do think that that might be the
Mm.
case.
Oh, look, it's sleep is really an important thing. And I mean, I know shift workers, it's very hard for them. And I've sort of tried to coax them to basically try and focus on fasting in the evenings and to focus on eating in daylight. And they do get better results that way.
Awesome.
But, the rest of us also need to basically remind ourselves. And I'm just as bad sometimes as anyone else. And sometimes, will creep beyond like, beyond the one, like last night I was, past 1 o'clock and I'm going, I need to get to bed, so, I don't follow my own rules
Yeah.
sometimes. So yes.
No, sometimes it's hard to sleep as well. I had that scenario last night.
Okay. Yeah.
So it wasn't
Yeah.
voluntary, it was
Oh,
involuntary.
look, I've sort of injured my sort of from weight. I think I injured because I was lifting weights and stuff like that. This is early in the week, and I sort of continued doing that without realizing and making it worse.
Mm.
And so I had really a lot of pain last night around that, and I sort of realized I just had, I need to sort of rest and take it easy. So, we do crazy things sometimes.
Yes.
And I got myself checked out, and they basically just confirmed that it was muscle skeletal, and that I basically need to rest.
All right. Well, that's good
So
news though.
yeah, so the
Did
crazy things we do.
did we stray off topic here?
We have, we
Totally.
have, we have.
Because I was thinking, where were we before we
Yes.
started
Now
talking
let's
about
get
the
back.
races?
Let's get back to basically to the topic. Now,
Yeah.
what so Kempler's diet was that, I mean, he would,
Oh, there we go. Yes.
so basically Kempler would actually reintroduce like small amounts of lean meat and vegetables in the latter part of his diet. So, but the focus was to basically deal with the pathology, to basically, from what he understood, is that when you combine too many different things together, it seems not to work as well. But he didn't understand the Randall cycle, that
Yep.
sort of side of things. So he basically used this as, okay, do this, lose the weight, clear yourself up, make yourself healthier, and then slowly introduce those foods back in and go back to a normal mixed diet.
Right.
So that was his approach. So, he wasn't basically a proponent of plant-based diets or vegan diets or high carbohydrate diets. He basically saw it as, another sort of type of strategy similar to the low carb to basically, allow people to lose weight and get healthier. And in particular, it was for people that basically couldn't that had a lot of kidney disease. Like he was focused on doing a lot of research on people with, really poor kidney disease. So he was trying to find a solution to that. How can you basically provide energy for the body, but at the same time allow the kidneys to heal without being, assaulted by too much protein? So that was his idea. So his idea wasn't basically to promote a plant-based diet forever, but it was basically to give the kidneys relief, and then allow them to basically, heal, in, through this diet. And it did work. He had very good results, not only in weight loss, but also in extreme, really hypertensive type, kidney, as it was called, hypertensive kidney failure, or not failure. There was another name that he used anyway,
Okay.
but basically, where you had really poor kidney, sort of function, and that was his sort of main sort of approach to looking at that sort of stuff. I
But
just
you could have done that the other way as well, couldn't you? With just high fat, but
Yeah,
no
that's
protein.
that's true. But the the reality at the time is you have to realize you're in a time where everybody's using a low carbohydrate Banting style diet to reduce weight and all this, but it doesn't seem like it's very effective in dealing with severe kidney disease.
Right.
And also we know that, they were looking at, they don't have the modern equipment nowadays to realize that, that just because you're losing some protein out of the kidneys, it doesn't mean that the kidneys can't handle protein.
Yes.
But so you have to think about the mindset of people. They're getting these urinary samples, they're checking them and go, oh shit, and that is why he went to that extreme level of 4% protein. There were specific reasons behind it. They're 4% protein, 2% fat, and 94%, carbs, sugar, basically refined sugar, most of it. I mean, if you think about it, rice, fruit juice, it's all refined sugar. There was absolute, obviously on this diet, the patients did not have any stomach upsets or any issues like that because there was no fiber to be seen nearly. Very little. Whatever fiber, you had a bit of fiber that came out of, which you got some, short chain fatty acid from the rice, and that was about it. So you were still getting some short chain fatty acid, which is required by the body, but you were getting it, so that was covered. The vitamins covered the deficiencies in the actual food, and iron was one of the key mineral supplements. The other electrolytes were kept quite low deliberately because, there was a belief it puts too much stress on the kidneys, and also because if you're putting so much carbs and you're pushing up insulin to some extent, you've got more water retention, more, fluid retention, you've got more retention of those sort of minerals anyway, so that can be an issue. So he had realized that from his experiments on the rats. So that is why he did the diet the way he did, and he had a lot of success, in these sort of reversals. So it wasn't that he didn't have any success, and it's really important that we understand, because then we sort of understand how these things came about. Because sometimes there are arguments out there. I'll just give me a sec. I'll just bring up my Walter basically folder, and I'll share.
Dedicated folder. So vicious.
Screen 2, share. Okay.
Yeah, we see the folder.
Okay. It's going to come up. So this is the man himself. These are the results that he was getting given up until the 1960s.
So they had the before and after pictures then as well.
Yep. And let me just, I'll have to go back. And here's the actual composition of the diet that he did in his experiment. So it was
5 grams of fat. Imagine the fat cravings you would get from that sort of diet.
Yeah, so basically that's where the fructose comes in. A lot of that fructose, that the 1 liter of fruit juice, is specifically to get the body to produce its own fat. So
amazing.
Yeah, exactly. So he really figured a lot of this these things out. There's your sort of sodium sort of levels really abysmally low. So he's really figured a lot of this sort of stuff out with his rodent experiments to basically play around, between a standard mixed diet at the time, and basically his diet, and it was basically the rice, fruit, sugar diet. A lot of people call it the rice diet, but it was actually rice, fruit, sugar diet. Yeah. It basically composed of any amount of fruit, up to about 1 liter of fruit juice. So it was 350 up to 350 grams of rice, and Yeah, there was. Oh, yeah, that's right. And the table
Oh,
sugar, you could have as much as you liked.
I would just make rice pudding all day long.
So this is the sort of diet approach that that this man sort of had. I'll just shut down all those folders. Yeah, so it was when you look at it like that, you go, bloody hell, but and this is pre-Randall.
Yeah.
This is before people were aware of the Randall cycle, which hadn't been elucidated yet, in science. And so, he was trying to find a solution he tried everything for people with chronic kidney disease. So, but the problem is when he was, doing the carb, like the low carb sort of stuff, he did the standard low carb. He didn't basically do a therapeutic style low carb. And that's why, yes, the John Hopkins University Hospital was already doing something like that. But, that sort of came at we're talking about a time when academia was very disconnected. There was, we're not like today where we've got the internet, people can actually communicate with others, well aware. We're talking about a time when, you worked at a university, hardly anybody knew you. You occasionally may have ended up at some conference once in a blue moon, and and you only knew somebody else in another academic areas because one of your friends got employed there, and you had a contact, and that was it. And whatever sort of stuff got into different magazines, and different universities tended to publish in different magazines at the time as well, because there was different prestige behind it. There was different, basically. It was traditional academic politics. Of the time. You had certain types of universities like Harvard, Cambridge, those sort of universities which viewed themselves very separate from others. There was a lot of that demarcation as well that existed back then, far more than today. So these are reasons why these people had not seen these other players, were not aware of these sort of things, and so it's very easy to say, well, why didn't they? But they weren't aware, and they were just playing around and experimenting. The standard diet didn't work. They weren't aware of the therapeutic form of ketosis, so they tried to go the other way in an extreme way, and got results. We can't say that they didn't get results, but even Walter realised that it's not a sustainable diet.
Yeah.
And it's something we've actually Bart's put, really hammered, that yes, you can get certain results because of its catabolic effects. You can lose weight, you can improve certain biomarkers and all that, but it's deficient and it's not sustainable. At the end, you can't stay on it forever. You will degenerate and break down, as we see a lot of the vegans do. And even supplementation can only go so far.
Talk about the hormonal damage that you might
Precisely.
be incurring on yourself, and that's going to be there for you potentially for years or forever.
That's
some
right.
people probably.
Yep. And Walter understood that. The difference is that that basically he needed a diet that would fix people with this sort of condition.
Yeah.
And it worked. And that was sort of his approach in doing that. Later came players like Ansel Keys, who out of Minnesota University, who were focused on they were Ansel Keys, basically, as I've said before, he was an economist who basically couldn't get employment in the Great Depression. So his friend told him to go and just do something, and he went and did PhD in ill physiology. So and then all of a sudden, sort of the government came around, went to his university, and they wanted somebody to basically create rations for the troops, the K rations. And again, he was just lucky to be there at the right place at the right time, and be influenced by the sort of food industry at the time, and because he had to interact with the food industry because the military basically wanted something, and he had to check what sort of products were available and what industry could produce. So that's how he got into bed very early with the food industry. you know.
Yeah.
So that's also what corrupted a lot of his science later on, because he got into bed with the food industry, and that's why, compared to many other academics, he's the closest thing to a criminal in that environment, you know. So, I mean, the other thing that we need to understand is that Ansel Keys also used in his Minnesota study for the conscientious objectors. He also used a similar type of diet, but the difference is he calorie constricted. So he lowered the calorie levels. He had slightly more protein and more fat in his diet composition, but lowered the caloric intake of carbs. It still was high carb in comparison to the other macros, but it was basically to mimic what the population in Europe, because this was done in 1944, to see what the population in Europe would be in a state of starvation, and how, and what, how they should, feed these people and how should respond. So basically, he put those conscientious objectors who wasted away and severely and became emaciated, not just wasted away, but emaciated, where Walter's experiment just showed a lot of weight loss, but as long as you basically, reintroduce some of those foods in and kept the calories up, you didn't get a wasting away effect.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, people like Julian Ryder, who does something similar, that's what he criticizes all the other vegetards out there, and criticizes them and bangs them over the head that you're not doing it like Walter. Well, he doesn't say that, because he just grabs Ansel Keys' book and does this. But the thing is, he doesn't realize that it's the foundation is Walter, not Ansel Keys. Most of these people go back to Ansel Keys, but they don't realize Walter was the one that actually influenced people like Ansel Keys and others with his experiments. So everybody's forgotten the real person who created this sort of dietary approach, and it wasn't Ansel Keys. He just basically plagiarized it, and because he had seen the successes that Walter had, and when he basically then upped the calories back to normal for these conscientious objectors, he saw they recovered very quickly. He made this stupid conclusion that, that was the sort of diet, and Walter was having success. This is the way we're going to go. This is what we're going to recommend. And it fitted with the food industry, because the food industry was basically, from the US at the time, there was this is pre-Marshall Plan, but they were actually preparing for, getting into Europe, taking control of most of Europe, and the consequences of that. And then when eventually they did get into Europe, and the war was ended, then they realized, we're going to have a competition in the future with the Soviet Union. So we basically need to up the calories of these people and basically make them, viable for the Western Alliance. So as a consequence, the easiest things to put into the diet were seed oils and basically refined carbohydrates, grains and all that. And they were all shipped out of the US into Europe, and that's how Europe was poisoned, and many other parts of the world.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you.
Yes. It was. Look, it was due to the war, and due to the recommendations of Ansel Keys to the military that this is what they should do because of those experiments, and and the rest is sort of history in that regard. But this is what. Yep.
Yeah. But Ansel Keys wasn't the only one who had an opinion at the time.
No. There were many others that disagreed with Ansel Keys, but he had the let's say
the contacts,
and that really, he was in the UK. He was well known in the UK, and championed the sort of notion that sugar is poison, but he was just ignored.
Yeah,
because at the end of the day, politicians, and Pritikin also was a very close friend of Ansel Keys as well, which many people don't realise. And Pritikin was basically a very good mate and friend of McGovern. Remember the McGovern Committee, the Senate Committee in 1977, where they looked at basically, the dietary, approach for America? Well, Pritikin was a good mate of his.
Okay.
You know, a lot of people don't realise that, and so that's part of, you know, the reason behind that sort of stuff. And I've always said that, you know, I mean, but there were changes also that actually happened sort of later on, like no, I wouldn't. I know I've got something, but I don't know where I've got it at the moment.
It's all right.
You saw what my desktop was like before with all the folders. It's all over
you
the
haven't
place.
seen mine.
Okay, yeah. Sometimes I forget where I put things, but anyway, I do remember parts of it. The key things, what was happening. So you have to remember that you had the board of directors of the American Heart Association. I think it was either 62 or 61. It may have been late 61. I can't remember exactly. It was actually Ansel Keys came onto the board, and then slowly but surely, within that whole year, he moved a lot of other people off the board and brought a lot of his, what I call the Nutritional Mafia, onto the board. And then basically he started recommending his dietary approach, you know, because you know, so he had already basically been moving to do all these dietary you know, tests and stuff like that. They started, but they needed funding. And
so how did he manage to do that? How did he manage to put, you know, push all those people
well,
on the board?
initially, let's put it this way. Initially, there were pressures from political areas in America to basically have Ansel Keys on the committee. You know, and so and the Heart Foundation was being put under pressure. One, it was getting private funding from some commercial entities who were very close to Ansel Keys, and then on the other side, you had government that was also providing certain funding to some of these academics, and so there was pressure. You know, put Ansel Keys on. You know, and when Ansel Keys got on, he was a bully. Everybody knew that, and basically just bullied other people that he opposed off the committee and brought more of his. And slowly but surely, over a certain amount of time, was able to transform the board from a board that was basically, you know, saying, well, we've got no proof that dietary fat is a problem at all, to basically being a board that was hostile to animal products in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the recommendations that the American Heart Association had done back in the 1957, they were actually, you know, very much along the lines of, you know, what we would call low carb in some regards.
And that's so interesting. That is the only time the dietary recommendations have changed drastically and really quickly.
Exactly.
Now they might, oh, well, we might just dial down on the sugar a little bit this year. Next year, we might do a little bit of that. But it's so slow. It's I'm going to be dead before anything major
pretty
happens.
much. But there's a reason for that, is because nowadays a lot of the committee members are, you know, plant-based. You know, that's the reason behind it. And while there are a few other voices there, a lot of those voices tend to be for the mixed macronutrients, for certain industry groups in that regard. And so you don't have this strong impetus or strong sort of pressure to make that quick shift, you know, where when you think about it, those committees were basically radically altered. You know, Ansel Keys not only bullies his way onto one committee, but a lot of nutritional committees with his mates. And slowly but surely was able to push out all opposition and basically threaten anybody else with funding, you know, cuts. And so, yeah, look, by then, you know, aligning himself with a number of players within the USDA and the National Institute of Health, he was basically quite clearly able to dominate all these groups. And, you know, whatever Ansel said goes, you know, and pretty much this is where we ended up getting into the situation where, you know, McGovern had people like Pritikin, you know, whispering in his ears, you know, and basically telling him, you know, you need to basically, you know, start recommending what, you know, what basically the Heart Foundation is actually recommending, what Ansel Keys' people are saying, you know. and that's where a lot of the pressure was coming. At the there was influence, and also there was basically the industry lobbyists were behind Ansel Keys because he was their man. The seed oil companies, he was their man. Remember, Ansel Keys, they had actually done a lot of these studies through the 60s and 70s and all that, and they hid them. I mean, one study was hidden for 16 years, and the whole reason behind it is that they just did it. Just what was it? One of the proponents actually said it wasn't the result we're expecting. So that's not science. Science is basically you put up a hypothesis, then you try to shoot it down. And if you can't shoot it down, then you've actually, and other people can't shoot it down, then you've actually proven that there is basically some, validity to that science, because it can stand the course of time.
Yeah, isn't that happening now as well? When you do something, you want to prove something, as in, you have a bias.
Yep.
So you're going to test that, and when you don't get the results, you're just not going to publish anything at all. So that doesn't get published.
And it very much has become like that. That's why I say a lot of science today is corrupt, because we've got a problem where, even the pharmaceutical companies, they basically will do 6, 7 studies, and then they'll cull the numbers down. So they'll start with a big number of people. And when they find a number of people that because of certain genetics, they have less side effects, then they'll do a study on those people. But they'll still, to cover themselves legally, they will still in the fine print put all the side effects.
Yeah.
But they'll say the study shows not a problem, but they'll still pull because they know that eventually somebody at some stage will basically test, and they can say, well, we actually covered our ass legally. We've said that there are these potential side effects, because they always knew.
Then we need to change the rules around that, because
We do.
that is deception on a very high level, and it kills people.
Well, that's
every day.
That is exactly it.
Many more than the coronavirus, I can assure you that.
Yep, that's true, but it's unfortunate that currently the way things have been set up, they can get away with it. They don't have to basically. If there was legislation which compelled them to register all studies and to publish all studies that were happening, that would radically change things.
Could that happen, do you think?
That would need a lot of, us, everyday people to basically start pressuring politicians to make those legal changes. They won't happen on their own.
No.
So it's a bit
far from that.
I think we are. And we're very confused about a lot of this politics sort of stuff. A lot of us sometimes are very negative and have withdrawn away from it completely. And so as a consequence, these people can just ride shotgun. And I always say to people, look at parts of, corrupt third world countries where people pull away from politics completely because they've given up, and, the corruption level just goes through the roof at the top.
Yeah.
When you basically, as a citizen, no longer feel compelled to basically participate, you end up basically with the leaders you end up with. Yeah. And they tend to be nasty and very corrupt people that will do very naughty things. And and that's the reality. But a lot of us sometimes have this disconnect because there's a lot of misinformation, which is the biggest problem in that regard. But getting back to the subject matter that we were talking about, I mean, what slowly but surely these sort of committees that were dominated by Ansel Keys and his cronies, they were slowly able to change these sort of policies. They were able to push the sort of these different organisations, and when they tried to push within the with the National Institute of Health, they actually found resistance because there was still a number of academics there that were doing good research and saying, well, you're talking shit, you're talking crap, this isn't what we're finding. And so he had some friends there, but not many friends. I mean, later on, nowadays, these organizations have been heavily infiltrated by plant-based sort of thinking. But at the time, there was still really good academics that were still doing really good science, and and basically showing that what Ancel Keys was saying was just nonsense. So what Ancel Keys did, and his cronies and a number of other players, they started basically using the USDA as a vehicle to push their agenda, because, and this is where the USDA guidelines came, because people go, why isn't the National Institute of Health actually setting the guidelines? And why is an organization involved in agriculture setting the guidelines for food, for diet?
Yeah. Very good question.
Exactly. Nobody has ever answered that obvious question. Why is an organization that is dedicated to agriculture setting health or nutritional requirements for a population that's not directly involved with health? It's just a contradiction. But it's because basically he couldn't get his way with the NIH at the time, so he basically pursued the USDA and his friends within the food industry that had because pretty much the USDA was dominated by people from the food industry. And so this is how they were able then to basically utilize this organization like an authority, because it's a government department, to basically promote their agenda. And that's exactly what they did. It's no different than basically the bankers, the way they basically control the Federal Reserve in America, and practice their own sort of dodgy type of economics. But anyway, we won't go there. But it's the sort of the same thing that we find in that area. We find in the USDA, and the USDA tends to be an organisation which is very tied to the food industry, even today.
Yep.
And the food industry is more motivated by profits. The Coca-Cola brothers, they got a lot of influence in the USDA. They are basically big players. Within the nutritional world, they are one of the biggest players, and a lot of people don't realize they're sort of in the periphery. But most of the actual studies, most of the actual people that are in these organizations are actually directly funded or get money kickbacks from the Coca-Cola brothers. People don't realize this. And, that's why fruit juice and, and sodas and all that are promoted so heavily in the US for that reason. It's not accidental.
No, there's a lot of profit to be made there.
Precisely, and that's what's been happening in that part of the world, and that's how the guidelines were created by these sort of characters, and the characters, like there were people who were on the Academy of Science in the US and many other well-known academics around the US, and doctors like Atkins, that's well known by a lot of us, that were saying this is just nonsense. This is absolute nonsense. And I mean, as I mentioned right in the beginning part, coming to the conclusion, this sorry tale, it was basically, the 2000 USDA sort of, what was it called? The nutritional battle or something like that it was called, that happened in 2000. And that's when Dr. Atkins was there, and, Dean Ornish and, the big players, McDougall, all these sort of players that were there that were, Barry Shears, with the zone diet, and many others that were there that were basically, arguing, and some other doctors and minor players that were on the panel at the same time that were well known then, but sort of fallen by the wayside now. But that was just basically smoke and mirrors. And a lot of them, even the ones that were basically, the sort of the official line was, well, we don't have enough to either disagree. We're all here basically trying to find and help people. None of the, it was sort of downplaying, the committee was sort of downplaying the science, but always basically giving a lot of, time for the players that were against the, sort of the zone diet or the Atkins diet, and all the plant-based doctors were just saying, well, you've got no research, they were telling that Dr. Atkins, ignoring all the mountains of research that was done independently by others in the past, they basically said to him and basically said, well, is it, Dr. Atkins was a cardiologist at the time. I mean, he didn't have the time to go and do research. Let's be honest. Basically he had seen other people's research and sort of had done his own work and seen the results that he was getting with his people, and started promoting a diet that was much better for his clients. I mean, it's unfortunate the way the stories happened after the sort of the vegan community have been spreading lies and rumors about him. Because when he actually went into hospital after he'd actually hit his head on the pavement, icy pavement in New York, he basically, they put a whole lot of different drugs in him and all that, and really just bloated him up and made him and induced sort of a heart attack to him, trying to stabilize him because he had brain hemorrhage and stuff like that. And so, but, we're talking about science back then wasn't as good as it is today, with a sort of stabilizing sort of things that you can use. And a lot of it was experimental. And so he was just unfortunate, to die that way. But, and even his doctor basically had said his heart was fine. It didn't have any lesions or anything like that. And that's really important that people don't, exactly. So, a heart that's actually damaged will have lesions, will have all these sort of signs that it's not working properly, but you can basically, I mean, you can basically have, a severe electrolyte imbalance and actually have heart failure. Doesn't mean your heart's bad, just basically means, so these things can happen also due to drugs. But it's become a myth, now that's been promoted within the vegan community deliberately to basically, sow doubt, as they say, in people's minds.
I think that goes both ways. As soon as a vegan dies, we blame the vegan diet, and if a carnivore dies, they blame the carnivore diet. So apparently we're meant to be immortal because we're on a certain diet.
There's a bit of that, exactly. I mean, as I've always said, what a carnivore diet or a low carb diet or a keto diet have as an advantage is they support your hormonal health. They are basically healthy because they don't have any crap in them. As long as you're not putting any sort of keto bars and all this sort of stuff, this nonsense, this refined crap, and you stick to real foods that your body can actually transcript enzymes to break down, then you don't really have a problem. You will maintain good health, and it'll be up to your genetics how far you can go, how many times you can cell divide. At the end of the day, that will be the determinant, not anything else. If you keep it clean, but you'll have good hormonal health, which you won't on a plant-based or high carbohydrate diet. It's not going to happen.
Nope.
And even Walter had seen that. So that's one reason why he used it as a short-term measure, and then basically putting people back onto to meats and vegetables and other foods, away from refined carbs. Just so it had its place in creating these sort of keep it without knowing about the Randall cycle, but basically creating that extreme catabolic thing that you can actually do from either nutritional ketosis, which you can't do forever as well. Keto forever, not a good thing. And it's the same thing with these sort of plant-based, extreme sort of diets. You can't do them forever. Short term, you can get certain dramatic results, but they're not a long-term cure, and they actually are far more deleterious. Our bodies, because of the N15 isotope analysis that we've actually had through all these skeletal remains around the world, it's quite clear what our primary diet was. We've got the environmental information, not only the archaeological, but also the sort of the ice age information, how the climate was back then from ice cores. So it's quite clear what the environment was, that in many cases, you had ice right down to the tropics over a vast amount of years. So there was very little vegetation that could be used by humans. So the only option was what's on four legs, moving around, you know. So
you're saying they
it's
didn't have greenhouses?
definitely not.
Okay. Just
Definitely
want
not.
to make sure.
Yes, no hydroponics, you know, back in those days. Nothing like that. And the funny thing was, because of the lower carbon in the atmosphere as well, you had lower deuterium because it's a growth factor. You had, and you know, because deuterium basically is driven by the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. So you know, so that's where the growth factor comes for the plant. But at the same time, when you have lower deuterium, nowadays, like water has 155 parts per million. Unless you go really to different fractionations, which are at higher elevations where you've got more UV that depletes, and you can get sort of slightly lower to around about the 150, sub 150. But really back then it was estimated, and this is an estimated based on the ice core analysis, to have been around the 135 to 140 parts per million within that band.
Wow.
So basically consuming high fat and some water and some protein, because protein also has higher levels. Particular pork is lower, beef is higher deuterium, but you know, not much. You know, we're talking about like 5 parts per million, a couple of parts per million. But when you actually have 1-to-1, you average, because you know, fat tends to have less than like 100, anywhere between 102 to 115, or sorry, 120 odd. And so with the protein, and when you actually have mixed fats, you basically usually balance within that sweet zone of 120 parts per million. You don't want to be too catabolic, you don't want to be too anabolic, and you want to be at an efficient level where depletion can actually happen at normal rates. So that's the sort of side we can actually we need to point to. But you know, the politics of today are really welded back to that era. You know, that era of the 30s, the war years, the sort of displacement of traditional foods with processed foods, especially in the Great Depression. Seed oils became very popular. Refined carbs became very popular, displacing a lot of traditional foods. It's because they were cheaper. You know, and that continued after the war. And then you had these researchers that actually had done that research, and then their research was misused in a number of ways, in particular by what I call the vegan mafia, you know, that emerged. I mean, you got the McDougalls, you got you know, the McGregors today, and people like that basically jumped on this research, but ignored all the other ramifications of the diet. You know, so they ignored what Walter said about the other ramifications, just focused on that small therapeutic period of, you know, 1 year, more or less. And that's the whole thing, you know. And, you know, Pritikin basically was very much, Pritikin probably, he was more of a, you know, like a vegetarian style. And so was Ornish. And they basically always realized these things that, you know, that Walter had said, and basically always after that sort of therapeutic stage started introducing more, you know, animal foods, like more dairy, more eggs and stuff like that, because they realized you need the nutrition, you need these building blocks, you need the this food. But you know, they obviously didn't go as far as Walter did in introducing meat back, you know, into the diet. But that has been their approach, and their approach isn't the worst sort. It's vegetarian, yes. You know, it has its it's not as bad as a standard diet, and it's not as bad as a vegan diet in that regard, where vegan doctors are just basically they've adopted this extreme form that Walter had developed for a very short amount of time as a therapeutic thing, and now promote it like mad, you know, as a permanent thing. And I'm going, are you guys crazy? You know, it's just, and the aficionado, the top aficionado of this in the sort of the non-academic, the non-doctor sort of environment would be Harley, you know. And you can see him, he's lost his hair, he has to wear a wig, and, he's all these things. His hormones are in the toilet, generally speaking, and he sort of makes up things and supplements and does injectables. And he's even admitted to try and keep his muscle mass of doing steroids. He's admitted it on a number of occasions, even when he was debating Bart. But, had he listened to basically Walter, he would have realized you can't do this forever. It's only for a small amount of time.
Company Yellow Ted is looking.
Oh, Yellow Ted's spying, is he? Spying on us.
Stay serious. Here's Yellow Ted.
Oh, Yellow Ted.
I never thought Yellow Ted would be on my live stream or my
oh, there
channel.
you go.
But here we go.
Yes,
hello, girls and boys.
That's a shock to the system.
Yeah. Sorry. Didn't want to interrupt you, but I got very distracted there.
That's okay. It's good to have a bit of a laugh and all that.
Yeah.
Yes.
But don't we, when you think about, they want to extrapolate his results and make them somewhat seem healthy, and then they just say, take a pill, make up for all those nutritional deficiencies, and that is the only thing that is worth with it, because in the end of the day, we're all kind of biohackers, and we want to make it as easy and convenient for ourselves. And
welcome to the modern vegan diet.
Yes. So how well could a vegan actually do with just supplements? Where do you think,
Look,
at what point is it going to break?
Even Walter understood that that's not a sustainable position. No. That's why he introduced meat back and vegetables and other things, real food. You can't basically supplement your way to health. And the other issue is now we understand even more than Walter did in his days that the body has a number of pathways, conversion pathways and all that. And the reality is our bodies aren't very good at doing a number of conversions. They're not very good at converting beta carotene. They're not very good at converting a number of things, choline synthesis, especially Europeans. I've actually provided information of that in the past, and people who have seen my stuff know that it's only the Han Chinese up to 76% that can endogenously produce choline. Everybody else needs to get it from the diet.
Why are we keeping our blinkers on? Why don't we see anything? Why is it so hard to get the message that you actually do need a little bit of animal protein at least in your diet to be healthy?
I call it the fog of war. Mm-hmm. Like when you're in the middle of it, you can't see anything but yourself, your friends, just the immediate. And that's what it is. We're so caught up within our own sort of, little paradigm. And then you've got the media that has got their own, have been heavily influencing our minds for years. And when you've got all these sort of things, it's very hard for the average person. The occasional academic can do the shift. And you see it like, Tim Noakes, he carb loaded like mad as an athlete, like Harley does, like Julian Ryder does. And eventually he burnt out his pancreas. Yeah. Because insulin also, the other thing that most people don't realize, insulin requires zinc. Best source of zinc are animal foods. If you don't have enough zinc to support your pancreas, you're going to have problems in the long run. So that's the other thing that that people don't realize. There are certain nutrients that are required for a number of these functions, because people are unaware of these sort of things and see other people doing that and seeming to be able to, because nobody really tells you how they're feeling in most cases, especially the vegans. They lie like mad, Yeah. I mean, and then you got people like Frank that basically can't keep his mouth shut. And he comes up with, just sheer, I mean, he supplements copper, and I'm going, well, why aren't you eating liver? Oh, it's got too much retinol. Well, you're in the sun all the time, so isn't that, it's just, I don't know what it is with the current generation and the thinking and all that. Maybe it's just the way
everything with a pill.
I think to a large extent that is the approach that I see. Like high quality vitamins, like especially liposomal type things, you know, or certain types of minerals that have got a specific ionic sort of you know, the correct ionic structure to basically be absorbed properly, and they tend to be a bit more expensive,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But those sort of things, so to deal with nutritional deficiencies,
Yes.
use those sort of things, or certain injectables or whatever, and they should be under supervision as well. And once, you know, you've corrected your diet and included the foods that actually incorporate those things in, or fixed up, you know, a leaky gut, or you fixed up a sort of a malabsorption issue or whatever, then you basically shift primarily to real foods. I mean, but it just seems it's really easy to just to say, okay, I'll have another supplement, I'll take this, I'll take that, and it's just you look at they open up their sort of their cupboards, and you just see piles and piles of these supplements, and I'm going, the same stuff's in food and it's cheaper.
And it's
It's
probably
just
in the right ratio in the food, more or
precisely.
less.
It doesn't, and this is why people complain. Oh, I've got this imbalance. I've got that imbalance. I'm not feeling this. I'm feeling tired. I'm feeling lethargic. I'm feeling I'm basically becoming dizzy and all that. And I'm going, you know,
What are you doing?
precisely. What are you doing? You know, I mean, I usually say people say, do you supplement? I said, yeah, I do supplement, but my supplements are all aminos, and they're for specific reasons. Taurine, because as you get older, you biosynthesize less taurine. You know, and taurine's really good. Taurine even has a regulatory effect on the immune system, which is really important. It doesn't control, but it sort of down regulates the sort of the cytokine effect.
Yep.
It sort of moderates it, in a sense. So maybe this is another reason why older people in older ages, they can synthesize less, become more vulnerable to these cytokine type storms effects. So I sort of supplement, you know, when it comes to, you know, to that, and then basically I use also choline, because I sometimes get sick and tired of eating so many eggs, and I've got one of the most worst deficiencies. One, I can't convert from methionine choline, and I can't actually also, but I've got really poor endogenous biosynthesis. So basically, I'm in the worst genetic sort of position. And it's a key methylator. So basically, I take it. If I'm not eating enough eggs, if I have 4 eggs, big steak, and some other sources, I won't take the supplement that day. But if I basically can't be bothered having any sort of eggs that day, I've just basically hammered myself with eggs for the last week, then I'll basically say, I'll bugger it. And I don't want to, and I can't be bothered having liver. I'll just, you know, so it's occasional. My choline is occasional.
Yeah.
And also the other one is I use L-citrulline. L-citrulline will convert in the bloodstream into L-arginine, and L-arginine will also is a regulator, because it actually binds to macrophage and actually regulates them, which is good. But I don't use it for that reason. That's just, you know, the primary reason that I use it is basically for more nitric oxide synthesis, basically to vasodilation, you know.
Yeah.
So because of my previous condition.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole point, is that you are taking these specific supplements for a specific condition
Precisely.
that you are suffering from.
Exactly.
I spoke to a client not many days ago, and I was like, do you take any supplements? And she's like, no. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And then it turns out that she's taking magnesium citrate, she's taking multivitamin, and she's taking this and that. I'm like, those are supplements. Why didn't you tell me?
Precisely.
Ditch the multivitamin. The magnesium, you can probably keep it. It's probably not going to do you any harm, but
Yeah,
you know,
yes.
it's so ingrained that a multivitamin is almost essential that we don't even think about it as a supplement anymore.
I mean, we don't need actually much magnesium. When you're on a like a ketotic or a low carb, you don't need a lot of magnesium. Magnesium is more required for carbohydrate, you know, sort of metabolism. The other thing is, you know, B1, thiamine.
Yeah.
You only need half when you're on a keto or carnivore diet. You know, you don't need as much. You need more riboflavin, but that's a different point. And basically, I usually have a glass. I usually get from milk, raw milk. So that's how I get additional, because just one glass of milk gives you 50% of your riboflavin.
Yeah, you got
And I
to
have a
pitch
big
your milk
steak.
here.
Yep, that's it. And yeah, oh, you've seen that one, have you? And
No, yeah, I know you like your milk,
yeah,
your raw milk.
and yeah, raw milk. Yeah, and basically, yeah, it makes, I cover myself with real food, because at the end of the day, real food will keep you healthy. And I say to people, you know, if you're over 50, taurine is a good idea.
Yeah.
If you're basically got a pre-existing condition where you need to basically improve your, you know, your cardiovascular function and stuff like that, yep, I can see a place for basically using L-citrulline. You know, if you've got a genetic reason for choline, you would buy it. If you don't, you don't. You know, you've got to have reasons for it, because the other thing that I always point to people is a lot of these refined supplements, they're high in deuterium. So they're not a health food. They're there to supplement a requirement to be covered.
Yes.
That's all they're there for. They're not basically there as food. Food is food, you know, and there's, you know, a lot of that sort of stuff, nonsense. And the you know, the other thing that I do is I occasionally, I haven't got any at the moment, I go through stages where I sulfonate myself a bit, and then I just, you know, I'll probably do it. If I have a cheat day, I'll go for the whole week. If I don't have a cheat day, then I'll basically keep it clean and probably have it twice a week. That means MSM sulfur, just to add some additional, you know, not only for methylation, but just also for the pericellular matrix within my body, just to sulfonate that and maintain that negative charge. And I always combine that sulfonation with grounding. So I sort of combine the two. I'll have the sulfur first, and then half an hour later, I'll go out and basically, you know, I'll do, because I usually have the L-citrulline then, because you want that nitric oxide boost just prior to exercise. Then you go and do the exercise. Then you basically ground yourself, so you get the benefit of that. You know, not, you know, the glycocalyx releasing more nitric oxide, plus increasing the sort of the sort of negative charge in the body, because really that negative charge is what we want, more negative charge in our body to be healthy. And so I sort of try and combine those things to try and improve my health. So, you know, stick to my circadian rhythms, light, sun, get as much sun as possible. These are the things that people need. These are the natural things that are basically our body desires and wants. You're not going to get health from a pill, basically. You may get what it's a short-term alleviation of a deficiency, but it's not food, you know.
They can help some people in certain situations sometimes, but it's not a solution.
No, never has been.
Speaking of which, just I want to pick your brain on potassium as well. What do you think about supplementing with potassium? Should we not do that? Is it needed at all?
No, I don't think so. If you keep your sodium levels up high enough, you won't lose any potassium. At the end of the day, those you know, those pumps in your cell can be undermined from insufficient amount of what I call seawater in our bloodstream. Because at the end of the day, all life originates from the oceans, and if your blood doesn't have the sort of composition of seawater, and that includes, you know, seawater tends to have more calcium and more basically sodium. And if you don't have those in your diet, that they are, but obviously, you know, calcium needs to be properly regulated, you know, and that's where retinol and vitamin D3 play a role. Sunshine. But also, exactly, and also MK4, the animal form of vitamin K2.
Yep.
That is what the body, you know, sucks up like mad. You have a supplement and you check your blood after, there's hardly any in the blood, you know. It basically is taken up so rapidly because the body needs it so much. And if you basically, then you won't have a calcium problem. But you shouldn't be getting calcium from food, from meat products, from bones, and from dairy, if you can tolerate it. You should not basically consume dairy if you can't tolerate it. That's just ridiculous. Unless you've got the genetics for it. I sometimes scratch my head, people saying, oh, experimenting with it. And I'm going, okay, fair enough. Have fun in the toilet.
Am I getting enough calcium if I'm not eating dairy?
You may not be. It depends. That's why I say to people like that, are you getting enough connective tissue? Not only the glycine, but you need the, you need basically, from that from the, the bones. You're not only getting the fat, the marrow and stuff like that, the monounsaturated, which is primarily, but you're also basically getting a lot of, those minerals that are required. I sometimes, if I basically, when I buy certain bones and they're soft bones and all that, I actually chew them and eat them. And that's how I get my minerals. And my body, if it doesn't need as many, it'll excrete them. If it needs them, it'll store them into my bones. And that's what the MK4 is, to basically activate those proteins that drive those minerals into the bones. And they'll be there stored, and when the body needs them, it'll take them off and use them, in that way. The body has this ability to store things in soft tissue and hard tissue, and basically take it and use it and move it around and all that.
Yeah.
You only get problems when you have long periods of deficiency, and this is the problem that a lot of people don't realize. You could basically have a lot of stored calcium, a whole lot of stored minerals, and not be able to utilize them properly. Why? Because you can't transcript enzymes to utilize them.
Yes.
You're not getting enough protein in there. You're not getting enough of those fat soluble vitamins that regulate those enzymes. And the key, it's the fat soluble that do most of the regulation.
Yeah.
A few other things, a few aminos like taurine and stuff like that have a regulatory effect and other things. But yeah.
And that's why I was asking you about the potassium, because obviously eating a carnivorous diet, you're getting a lot less potassium than someone who would eat a keto diet, for example.
I say if you're deficient, I have a sort of based on caloric energetics, where I say basically there's two schools of thoughts.
Yes.
1.8 for every calorie that you are required to maintain your body weight. And I usually say 1.5. I would rather be slightly under and more on the sodium than basically higher on the potassium and basically create more excretion of sodium and imbalances.
Well, that's the thing. The kidneys excrete and retain a lot of sodium, depending on, there's a lot more going on there than it actually is with the potassium metabolism.
They use up to 75% of ATP in the kidneys to basically recycle sodium. That's how important it is. And also uric acid as well. Both of those are very important.
Yes. Am I being silly drinking snake juice with potassium and sodium?
If it's a small amount, it's probably not a big issue, because I sometimes will have like cream of tartar, and I'll just basically tap a bit of that into a glass of water. But if I've basically had sufficient dairy, yogurt and stuff like that, now all dairy food is very high in potassium, very low in sodium and very high in potassium, especially the less processed it is. Cheese, the exception to the rule. But if you look at basically, that's a method of basically preservation, traditional method of preservation where we used, so cheese would, out of all the dairy, would be the most very well balanced between potassium and sodium. But if you're consuming, raw dairy like I do, and you're consuming things like sort of dairy products like kefir and whatever else that are basically very, very low in sodium and very high in potassium, the last thing you want to be doing is supplementing potassium. That's when you basically, I usually, if I'm having too much dairy, because I do love it, in a day, I will basically have a glass of water and I'll basically put more salt in it.
Yeah.
Just I'll grind a bit of sea salt in it, stir it up, so it actually, I'll leave it for a while to basically, become more diluted, and then basically I'll be sipping on that to basically maintain that, because it's the reason why the Maasai bleed their animals for the same reason, to get the sodium, because otherwise they would be basically consuming a very high potassium diet. And this is what people don't understand. The reason why some tribal people out there don't consume as much have been detected not to consume as much, sodium, is because they're consuming certain foods that are giving them too much sodium anyway. They don't need it. So this is the problem when you don't look at everything and you just look at things very narrowly with blinkers on.
Yep.
And you do research with blinkers, you end up with these sort of very skewed sort of results. Populations experimented with these foods over thousands of years. They worked out what worked and what didn't.
Yes.
And their wise men, who were their shaman, who would have been the geeks of the time, just because we have an accumulation of knowledge today, it doesn't mean that there aren't people with exceptional IQs even back then, just with less cultural knowledge. Less cultural knowledge doesn't mean dumber or smarter. It just means less cultural knowledge of what we call modern civilization type knowledge. But knowledge about the environment, knowledge of the way the environment works, the weather patterns and everything else, what plants and what sources of different nutrients and stuff like that, because their motivation was clearly focused on survival and food. That's where they were great innovators. And we basically turn our back on those great innovators when we ignore them.
Yeah, I think that was a good lesson.
Very good, exactly. That our nutritional experts could learn from.
Exactly, yes. Just, don't try to reinvent the wheel when you don't have to.
That's right, yes.
So thank you, Harry. I think we have gone way over time for what I planned and way out of topic as well, but it's always interesting to talk to you. And I had to pick your brain a little bit as well. Was there anything else that you felt that you wanted to add before we wrap it up?
No, I think I've covered pretty much the sort of the history behind, all that sort of stuff. And we spoke a bit about other traditional societies as well. But, we'll have a future chat and we'll go into deeper in some of this stuff, and we'll look at some other periods of time. And, there's always interesting stuff that.
Oh, God, yes. Yeah.
I like telling stories, as you know.
Yeah. And they're good to listen to. Maybe put them on before bed. I won't remember anything though. Well, thank you so much for actually taking the time and coming on my channel and talking about that, because I would never have done a video on that myself. So that's awesome.
Yep, you're welcome. It was great. I had fun.
Good.
I enjoyed Teddy's appearance.
Yes. More Teddy or not? No.